I've always romanticized the idea of traveling across Europe by train, watching the countryside rush by while you sip hot coffee and listen to music. What could be more peaceful? So after I graduated college, I treated myself to a solo backpacking trip, starting from Germany and heading all the way down to Italy. I had everything planned out, or at least I thought I did. The first few weeks were amazing. I explored Berlin, Prague, and Vienna. When I reached Salzburg, I decided to take an overnight train to Venice. I'd read online that booking a sleeper cabin was a fun and efficient way to travel while resting. I arrived at the Salzburg Hauptbahnhof around 9 p.m., where the train was already waiting on the platform. It was one of those older-style European night trains, all steel and shadows. There weren't many people boarding. I figured most people had already done their traveling earlier in the day. I found my cabin 42. It was tiny but cozy, with a fold-down bed, a sink, and a window that didn't quite latch shut. The hallway outside was dimly lit with flickering yellow bulbs. Something about the train felt off, like it hadn't been properly maintained in years. But it was too late to back out now. I was getting comfortable when a knock came at the door. I opened it, expecting a conductor or maybe someone who had been double booked in my cabin, but instead, a woman stood there in her early 40s, holding a canvas bag. She had thin, greasy blonde hair, and her eyes didn't quite look straight at me. "I think I'm supposed to be in this room," she said, in a thick Eastern European accent. I showed her my ticket. "This is cabin 42. She stared at it for a second, then smiled faintly and said, "Oh, maybe I am wrong," and shuffled off down the corridor. Okay, weird, but not the end of the world. I shut the door and locked it just to be safe. I turned off the lights, cracked the window a bit, and lay down. The gentle rocking of the train was oddly soothing. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember was waking up in total darkness. It wasn't pitch black. There was a faint glow from the hallway leaking through the doorframe, but something felt wrong. The rocking had stopped. I checked my phone, no signal, no time. I sat up and realized I was freezing. The window had blown open wider, letting in the cold night air. I went to latch it shut when I heard something from the hallway. Shuffling and breathing, slow, heavy breathing. I froze, my hand still on the window latch. The breathing stopped. Then a knock. Tab, tab, tab. Very soft, like fingertips against the wood. I didn't answer. Then the handle began to jiggle. I backed up, whispering to myself that this was just someone at the wrong door again. I mean, it happens. Drunks, misbooked passengers. But then the jiggling stopped, and I heard something that chilled me to my spine. Whispering. Just on the other side of the door. I couldn't make out the words, but it was fast, frantic, like someone arguing with themselves. I reached for my phone again, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Still no signal. I pressed my ear gently to the door. The whispering stopped, and then the lock clicked. I stepped back in shock. I had locked that door, I know I had, but it was unlocking from the outside. The door creaked open half an inch. I screamed and slammed it shut with all my weight, clicking the lock back into place and dragging my backpack in front of the door as an extra barrier. My heart was pounding in my ears. I stayed like that for an hour, maybe more, just sitting against the door, trying to listen for movement. Eventually, the train started moving again, jerking slightly as it picked up speed. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door and peek out, the hallway was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The train arrived in Venice early the next morning. I got off as fast as I could and found the nearest hotel with an open room. I don't remember how I even checked in. I was so dazed I could barely think. The weirdest part. Later that afternoon, I checked with the Austrian Railways online. I wanted to file a report about the incident. I gave them my train number and departure time. They emailed me back and said that cabin 42 was listed as out of service. Had been for months. I asked if maybe there had been a clerical error, but they were firm. No passengers had been booked in that room. It wasn't even available for online purchase. To this day, I have no idea who that woman was, or how anyone could have gotten into my cabin. But I haven't taken a night train since. I used to think spontaneous trips were the most exciting kind of travel. You just pack a bag, find a cheap flight, and go. No over-planning, no stress. So in the summer of 2022, when my friend Mia called me and said, "Want to go to Finland next week?" I found an off-season lakeside cabin for dirt cheap. I said yes without even asking for details. That was my mistake. We landed in Helsinki, rented a car, and drove about 3 hours north into the Lakeland region. The cabin was located on the edge of a forest, about 20 minutes from the nearest village. It was one of those minimalist Nordic homes, sleek wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wraparound deck that faced the lake. The place was silent. No bugs, no birds, not even the sound of water lapping against the dock. Mia was obsessed with the peace and quiet. I was. Something about that cabin felt weird the second we arrived. The air smelled metallic, and there was this thick fog that hovered over the water, never burning off, not in the morning, not at night. That first evening, we were out on the deck sipping wine, watching the sun refuse to set. In summer, Finnish nights last forever, just a pale golden dusk that lingers for hours. The lake looked like a black mirror, perfectly still. Too still. That's when I noticed the dock, a long wooden pier stretching out into the lake. At the very end of it stood a figure. I nearly dropped my glass. It looked like a man, thin, unmoving, just standing there. "Mia," I whispered, "do you see that?" She squinted, then shrugged. "Probably one of the neighbors." "There are no neighbors." She looked again, and now the dock was empty. We both stared at it for another minute, trying to convince ourselves we had imagined it. I mean, it was misty. Maybe it was just a trick of the fog, but I couldn't shake the image. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing dripping sounds, like water hitting hardwood. I figured maybe it was the bathroom faucet. But when I checked, everything was dry. The sound kept going, drip, drip, drip. I traced it to the living room. There, beneath the large window facing the lake, was a puddle of water. No open windows, no rain, just a spreading puddle on the wooden floor. Then came footsteps. Slow, deliberate, squelching footsteps. From the direction of the hallway. I spun around, but no one was there. I ran back to Mia's room and practically kicked the door open. She was asleep. I shook her awake and told her everything. At first, she didn't believe me, but then we both heard it together. A wet slapping sound, like bare feet across the deck. We ran to the living room and stared out the window. There was a handprint on the outside glass, a large, dripping handprint slowly sliding down the pane. Mia gasped. We didn't sleep after that. just waited for sunrise. When daylight finally returned, though it never really got dark, we decided to pack up and leave. Screw the second half of the trip, but when we opened the front door, we froze. The dock, it had wet footprints. Bare footprints. They led from the edge of the water all the way up to the front door and then stopped, as if someone had come inside. We bolted. Drove down the winding forest road like our lives depended on it. Mia kept checking the rearview mirror like she expected something to be following us. I didn't blame her. We reached the village, ran into the cafe, and demanded to speak to someone, anyone, who knew about that property. A man in his 60s overheard and came over. He spoke English well enough to understand our panic. "That house," he said slowly, "should not be rented." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated, then told us the story. The cabin was built 20 years ago by a wealthy man from Helsinki. He designed it himself, everything perfect, everything modern. He and his wife stayed there one summer, only once. Because on their third night, she went out for a swim and never came back. They searched for days, dredged the lake, but the body was never found. After that, strange things started happening. Tenants complained of wet floors, water stains that wouldn't dry, handprints on windows. People would hear splashing in the middle of the night. Some even claimed to see a figure walking up the dock, soaked and shivering. Eventually, the owner stopped renting the place altogether. Locals stopped going near it. But recently, someone must have listed it again, probably under a different name. The man looked at us and said, "You are not the first to run." We left Finland that night. To this day, I can still hear those dripping footsteps in my dreams. This happened when I was 19, traveling solo across the Netherlands on a budget. I was going from city to city by train, staying in small hostels and using bikes to get around. It was early spring, still cold, and the skis stayed gray most of the time. Not exactly postcard-perfect weather, but I liked it that way. I had just arrived in a lesser-known town outside Utrecht. Quiet place, mostly locals. The kind of town where everyone looks at you a little too long because they know you don't belong. I had read about a super cheap hostel online called The Crossing, and despite the weird name, it had solid reviews. I showed up around 6 p.m., just after sunset. The hostel was set inside an old Dutch row house with ivy crawling up the brick and a narrow canal running just a few feet from the front steps. There was no reception desk, just a bell on the wall and a note that read, "Ring for check-in. Do not open the door after 10 p.m. for anyone." That should have been a red flag, but at the time, I thought it was just one of those quirky Euro hostel things. A guy in his 30s with thick-rimmed glasses came to the door. Didn't say much. Just checked my ID, handed me a brass key, and pointed to the top floor. "Room 6, he mumbled. "End of the hall, lock your door tight." That was red flag number 2. The room was sparse. A bed, a desk, a little window overlooking the canal. The mattress spring screamed when I sat on it, but I was so tired from traveling, I didn't care. I unpacked a bit, then headed into town to grab food and take some pictures of the old streets by the canal lights. I got back a little after 9:30 p.m. The streets were dead silent. No cars, no people, no dogs barking. I climbed the crooked staircase back to my room, locked the door like he said, and sat by the window with a sandwich and a bottle of cheap Dutch beer. I watched the canal outside, just thinking. That's when I noticed the man. He was standing on the far side of the canal, just under the flickering lamp post. Tall, pale, wearing what looked like an old fisherman's coat, the kind with those toggled buttons. He stood there perfectly still, staring straight across the water. At first I thought maybe he was drunk or waiting for someone, but then he turned slowly and looked right up at my window, at me. Even though the glass was foggy from condensation, I felt his eyes lock onto mine. It was like someone had put a hand on the back of my neck, that heavy, electric feeling. I backed away and shut the curtain, telling myself it was just a local being weird. A few minutes passed. Then I heard tapping. Not from the window, from the door. 3 soft taps, not urgent, like someone just checking if I was in. I didn't move. I stayed completely still, heart pounding. The tapping came again, then a voice. A low man's voice, barely more than a whisper. "You left the door open." Nope, no, absolutely not. I grabbed the key and double-checked the lock. It was definitely engaged. Then I backed up to the window, peeled the curtain just a tiny bit, and the man by the canal was gone. But the whisper came again. "Let me in." This time it was louder, right on the other side of the door. I ran to the door and yelled, "Who is it?" but got no answer, only silence. I stood frozen, straining my ears, trying to listen for footsteps, a door creak, anything. And then something happened that I can only describe as completely wrong. The door handle started to turn, slowly, as if someone was using a second key. Click. I threw my body against the door, jamming it shut again just before the latch gave out. I yelled, "Go away, I'll call the police," but there was no response. Just one more whisper. "It's already open." Then silence. I stayed up the entire night with my back against that door and the lights on. I didn't even try to sleep. The next morning I ran downstairs and told the man at the hostel everything. He looked at me without blinking and simply said, "Room 6 should not have been rented. That room faces the crossing." "What does that mean?" I asked him. He said nothing else, only that my key deposit would be refunded and that I should leave immediately. Fine by me. I packed up and left, practically jogging to the train station. But as I crossed the little footbridge over the canal, I looked down, and there, floating just beneath the surface of the water, was a coat. A dark fisherman's coat, tangled in reeds. No body, just the coat, arms outstretched. Like someone had tried to crawl back up, but couldn't. I left the town behind without looking back. I've since searched for the Crossing Hostel online, but there's nothing. No listings, no reviews. It's like it never existed. But I remember the man by the canal, and the voice behind the door, and the way he said it. "It's already open."